She looked at the human in fear. Later, the galaxy learned he wielded true power. Part 1. The doors of the Great Council Chamber opened, and Kiraveth felt her 4 hearts stop beating for a moment. A human walked through those doors. Just one human. He was alone. Kiraveth was a diplomat from the Valari people. Her species had traveled the stars for 10,000 years. They were traders and merchants. They knew how to read other beings. They knew when to be afraid. Right now, every part of her body told her to run. The human was not big. He was not tall. He had no armor on his body and no weapon in his hands. His hair was turning gray at the sides, and his eyes were brown and calm. He wore simple clothes, dark blue with a small symbol on his chest. He walked like someone taking a morning walk in a garden. But the entire Galactic Assembly fell silent when he entered. Kiraveth stood near the back of the chamber, watching. Around her, over 300 delegates from across the galaxy sat in their seats. Some of them commanded fleets of 1,000 ships. Some of them ruled empires that stretched across 100 star systems. Some of them had lived for 500 years and had seen civilizations rise and fall. All of them were afraid of this one, human. His name was Daniel Cole. He was the commander of the human diplomatic fleet. Kiraveth had read his file many times. He had been born on Earth, the small blue world where humans came from. He had served in their military for 30 years. He had a wife and 2 children back home. He liked to read old books and drink something called coffee. Nothing in his file explained why the galaxy feared him. Daniel walked to his seat near the center of the chamber. He nodded politely to the delegates around him. When his eyes passed over the Drexy warlord sitting 3 rows away, the massive alien shifted in his seat and looked away. The Drexy were conquerors. Their bodies were covered in plates of living metal. They stood 9 feet tall and had claws that could cut through starship hulls. They had conquered 17 star systems and had never known defeat. The Drexy warlord would not meet the human's eyes. A young human woman sat down next to Daniel. Her file said her name was Samantha Gray. She was his aide, his assistant. She carried a small computer tablet and smiled at something Daniel said to her. They were talking about coffee. The translator in Kiraveth's ear told her that Daniel was complaining about the coffee on the station. He said it tasted like engine fuel. Samantha laughed and said he was too picky. They talked about this for several minutes, like 2 friends chatting on a normal day. Around them, the most powerful beings in the galaxy watched in tense silence. Kiraveth did not understand. She had spent the last 3 cycles studying humans. She had read their history. She had watched recordings of their wars. She knew what they were capable of. But she still did not understand why they made everyone so afraid. Humans had only been in space for 40 years. They had discovered faster than light travel by accident, their scientists said. They had stumbled out of their small solar system and found a galaxy full of ancient civilizations. They should have been nothing. They should have been conquered or ignored. Instead, the Kovani Empire, which had ruled a quarter of the galaxy for 50,000 years, had signed a peace treaty with them after just 1 battle. The Drexy had stopped their expansion and pulled back their fleets. The Nethrek, a species of warriors who lived only for combat, had declared humans to be worthy of respect and had never attacked them again. 1 battle. That was all it had taken. Kiraveth had seen the recordings of that battle. A Kovani fleet of 200 ships had attacked the human colony on a world called New Boston. The humans had only 12 ships to defend the planet. The battle should have lasted minutes, it lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 11 human ships remained. The Kovani had lost 163 vessels, but that was not the part that scared the galaxy. The part that scared the galaxy was what the humans did after the battle. They did not celebrate. They did not claim victory. Instead, they sent rescue ships to save the surviving Kovani soldiers floating in the wreckage of their destroyed fleet. They pulled their enemies from the cold of space and gave them medical care. They fed them and kept them warm and treated their wounds. Then they sent them home. The Kovani Emperor had asked for peace talks the next day. The session began. The speaker, an ancient being made of crystal and light, called the assembly to order. The matter at hand was the Thornaki incursion. Kiraveth felt her blood run cold at the name. The Thornaki were a nightmare. They came from somewhere beyond the known galaxy. Their ships were black and moved like living things. They did not conquer worlds. They consumed them. They stripped planets of all life, of all resources, of everything. When they were done, only dead rocks remained. 17 species had already been exterminated. Entire civilizations gone forever. Billions of lives erased from the universe. The Thornaki had been advancing through the outer rim for 60 years, and nothing had stopped them. The assembly had gathered to discuss surrender. That was the truth that no one wanted to say out loud. They were here to discuss how to give the Thornaki whatever they wanted so they would stop killing. Delegate after delegate stood to speak. They talked about negotiations. They talked about tribute. They talked about offering uninhabited systems and resources. They talked about anything except fighting, because everyone knew that fighting was hopeless. The Thornaki fleet was estimated at over 50,000 ships. The combined forces of the entire Galactic Assembly were less than half that number. And the Thornaki technology was beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their weapons could tear through shields like paper. Their armor could survive direct hits from the most powerful cannons. There was no hope. There was only survival through surrender. Then Daniel Cole raised his hand. The speaker recognized him. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Daniel stood up slowly. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of delegates who quickly looked away. His face was calm. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but clear. He said that humanity would not surrender. The words hung in the air. Kiraveth saw delegates look at each other in confusion. Did the human not understand? Did he not know what the Thornaki were capable of? Daniel continued speaking. He said that humanity had a different way of looking at problems. He said that his people had a long history of facing impossible situations. He said that they had learned something important along the way. Then he began to tell them the story of Earth. Kiraveth leaned forward, her fear forgotten for a moment. Around her, the entire galaxy listened, and Daniel Cole began to speak. She looked at the human in fear. Later, the galaxy learned he wielded true power. Part 2. Daniel Cole stood before the Galactic Assembly, and he told them about hell. He spoke of Earth. He described a world of blue oceans and green forests, of mountains that touched the clouds and deserts that burned under a yellow sun. He told them it was a beautiful world. He told them it was also a world that had nearly destroyed itself many times. Humans, he explained, had spent most of their history at war. Not with aliens. Not with outside enemies. With each other. Kiraveth listened in growing confusion. The delegates around her shifted in their seats. This was not how species spoke in the Galactic Assembly. You did not reveal your weaknesses. You did not tell your enemies about your failures. The galactic way was to show strength and hide everything else. But Daniel kept talking. He described wars where millions had died in muddy trenches, fighting over a few miles of ground. He described weapons that could burn entire cities to ash in a single flash of light. He spoke of camps where his people had killed each other by the millions, not in battle, but in cold and organized murder. He spoke of a time called the Cold War, when two groups of humans had aimed enough weapons at each other to destroy their entire world many times over. For decades, They had lived with the knowledge that any mistake, any misunderstanding, could end everything. The Drexy warlord interrupted. His voice boomed through the chamber, his translator turning his growls into words. Why was the human telling them this? What did ancient history have to do with the Thornaki fleet that would arrive in less than one cycle? Was this some kind of trick? Daniel smiled at the warlord. It was a small smile, patient and calm. He said it was not a trick. He said it was context. He said the assembly needed to understand what humans were before they could understand what humans could do. Then he continued his story. He told them about what came after the wars. He described humans pulling each other from rubble, sharing food with enemies, rebuilding cities that had been destroyed. He talked about something called the United Nations, where former enemies sat together and tried to solve problems with words instead of weapons. He introduced a concept that made the translators struggle to find the right words in every language: forgiveness. He called it the ability to let go of anger, the choice to stop seeking revenge, the decision to offer peace to someone who had hurt you. Kiraveth saw delegates look at each other in confusion. In most galactic cultures, such behavior would be seen as weakness. If someone hurt you, you hurt them back. If someone killed your people, you killed their people. That was the way of things. That was how the strong survived. But Daniel explained that humans had tried that way. They had tried it for thousands of years. It had brought them nothing but more death, more pain, more destruction. So they had learned to try something else. The Nethrek delegate, a tall warrior with scales of deep purple, stood and demanded to know what this had to do with the Thornaki. The Thornaki did not want peace. The Thornaki did not negotiate. The Thornaki only consumed and destroyed. How could forgiveness stop a fleet of 50,000 ships? Daniel nodded at the question. He said it was a fair point. Then he told them what humanity had already done. 3 cycles ago, a human fleet had encountered the Thornaki advance force near a system called Kepler 442. The Thornaki had attacked immediately, as they always did. The humans had fought back, also as expected, but the humans had done something else during the battle. They had captured a Thornaki ship. They had taken prisoners, and they had talked to them. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions and accusations. The Thornaki did not talk. The Thornaki did not have language in any way the galaxy understood. They were monsters, pure and simple, forces of destruction that could not be reasoned with. Daniel waited for silence. When it came, he continued. The Thornaki did have language, he said. It was just very different from anything the galaxy had encountered before. Human linguists had spent 3 cycles working on it. They had made mistakes. They had tried again. They had kept working. And they had succeeded. Daniel gestured to Samantha, who pressed something on her tablet. A hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a Thornaki, a creature of black metal and organic tissue, something between a machine and a living thing. And it was speaking. The words came through the translators, rough and broken, but understandable. The Thornaki in the hologram was answering questions. It was explaining things about its species, its history, its purpose. Kiraveth felt her understanding of the universe shift beneath her. The Thornaki were not monsters. They were refugees. Their home star, Daniel explained, was dying. It had been dying for 300 years. The Thornaki had tried everything to save their world. They had failed. So they had fled, taking their entire species into the void between galaxies. But they were still dying. Their bodies, part machine and part flesh, were breaking down. Some kind of cellular decay was killing them slowly. Every Thornaki that existed would be dead within another 100 years. The consuming of worlds was not conquest. It was desperation. They stripped planets of resources, searching for anything that might cure their disease. They had killed billions not out of hatred or hunger for power, but out of the terror of extinction. They were dying, and they were afraid. The chamber was silent. Kiraveth saw expressions of shock on faces around her. Some delegates looked disgusted. Others looked confused. A few looked thoughtful. The Drexy warlord stood again. His voice was quieter now, uncertain. Even if this was true, he said, the Tharnaki had still killed 17 species. They had murdered billions of innocent beings. They deserved no mercy. They deserved extinction. Daniel turned to face the warlord directly. He said he understood that feeling. He said that humanity knew that feeling very well. When someone hurt you, when they killed the people you loved, every part of you wanted to hurt them back. Every part of you screamed for revenge. But revenge did not bring back the dead. Revenge did not undo the damage. Revenge only created more pain, more death, more suffering. Humanity had learned this lesson the hard way, written in the blood of billions of their own people. There was another way, Daniel said. A harder way. A way that took more strength and more courage than revenge ever could. And humanity was going to show the galaxy what that way looked like. He looked around the chamber one more time, meeting the eyes of delegates who no longer looked away. The human fleet had found a cure for the Tharnaki disease, and humanity was going to offer it to them. She looked at the human in fear. Later the galaxy learned he wielded true power. Part 3. The assembly exploded into chaos. Delegates screamed and shouted from their seats. Some demanded explanations. Others called Daniel a liar. The Drexy warlord roared that this was madness, that the Tharnaki deserved death, not medicine. Kiraveth stood frozen in place, watching it all unfold. Her mind was trying to understand what she had just heard. The humans had found a cure for the Tharnaki disease. The humans were going to save the monsters that had killed billions. How was this possible? Why would anyone do this? Daniel stood calmly in the center of the storm. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply waited. Samantha Gray stood next to him, her tablet ready, a small smile on her face, like she had seen this reaction before. Eventually, the speaker called for order. The crystal being pulsed with light, and its voice echoed through the chamber with ancient authority. The delegates slowly returned to their seats, though many still muttered angrily. The Kurvani ambassador was the first to speak in the silence that followed. He was old, even by galactic standards. His species lived for 1,000 years, and he had seen half that time. His voice was thin and dry, like wind through dead leaves. He asked Daniel to explain himself. How had humanity found this cure? And why would they give it to an enemy? Daniel nodded and gestured to Samantha again. New holograms appeared in the center of the chamber, showing medical data and genetic sequences. He explained that during the battle at Kepler 442, human Marines had boarded the captured Tharnaki ship. They had taken samples from the Tharnaki bodies they found. Some were dead. Some were alive. The humans had treated the living ones with medical care, just as they had treated the Kurvani survivors years ago. Human doctors had studied those samples. They had worked day and night for 3 cycles. The Tharnaki cellular decay was complicated, but it was not impossible to understand. It was caused by radiation damage from their dying star, damage that had been passed down through generations. Human medicine had dealt with radiation damage before. On Earth, there had been accidents and attacks involving something called nuclear material. Humans had learned to treat the damage it caused to living cells. The cure was not perfect, Daniel admitted. It would not work instantly, but it would stop the decay. It would save the Tharnaki species from extinction. The Nethrak warrior stood again. His scales had changed color, shifting from purple to a deep red that Kiraveth new meant anger. He asked why humanity would help the Thornaki. They had killed 17 species. They had murdered billions. The dead deserved justice. The dead deserved revenge. Giving the Thornaki a cure would only reward their crimes. Daniel turned to face the warrior directly. His voice was still calm, but there was something harder in it now. He said he understood the desire for revenge. He said humans knew that desire better than any species in the galaxy. They had invented 100 ways to destroy each other. They had perfected the art of killing. If any species understood the call of vengeance, it was humanity. But revenge would not bring back the dead. Destroying the Thornaki would not return the 17 species to life. It would not restore the billions who had been killed. It would only add more death to the universe, more pain, more loss. Humanity had tried revenge many times, Daniel said. They had followed that path for thousands of years. It had never led anywhere good. It had never brought peace. It had never stopped the cycle of violence. So humanity had learned to try something else. The conditions? The Corvani ambassador interrupted. You said there were conditions for the cure. What conditions? Daniel nodded. Yes, there were conditions. First, the Thornaki would stop their advance immediately. No more worlds would be consumed. No more species would die. Second, the Thornaki would submit to a tribunal. Representatives from every species they had harmed would sit in judgment. The crimes would be recorded. The victims would be remembered. Third, the Thornaki would pay reparations. Not money or resources, but service. They would help rebuild what they had destroyed. They would protect endangered species throughout the galaxy. They would spend generations making right what they had made wrong. And fourth, the Thornaki would share their technology. Their ships, their medicine, their knowledge would belong to the galaxy. Nothing would be hidden. The Drexy warlord laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. And if the Thornaki refuse? His voice was mocking. If they take your cure and continue their destruction, what then? Will you forgive them again? Daniel did not smile this time. He said that humanity hoped the Thornaki would accept the terms. He said that humans believed in second chances. He said that redemption was always possible, but he also said that humans had brought their fleet. The hologram changed again. It showed the human fleet positioned near the edge of Thornaki space. 200 ships, small by galactic standards. But the data that appeared next made the chamber fall silent. Each human ship carried weapons that no one else in the galaxy understood. The same weapons that had destroyed the Corvani fleet years ago. The same weapons that had made the Drexy stop their expansion. The same weapons that had earned the respect of the Nethrak. Humanity was offering mercy, Daniel said. They hoped mercy would be enough. But if mercy was rejected, humanity was prepared to offer something else. That he did not say what that something else was. He did not need to. Every delegate in the chamber understood. Kiraveth watched the faces around her. She saw the Drexy warlord sit back in his seat, his arrogance gone. She saw the Nethrak warrior nod slowly, his scales returning to purple. She saw the ancient Corvani ambassador close his eyes, as if remembering something from long ago. She finally understood why the galaxy feared humanity. It was not their weapons. It was not their technology. It was not their capacity for violence. It was the fact that they could destroy anyone who threatened them. And they chose not to. That was true power. And the galaxy was only beginning to understand what that power meant. She looked at the human in fear. Later, the galaxy learned he wielded true power. 3 cycles later, Kiraveth stood on the observation deck of the human diplomatic vessel Horizon. Through the massive windows, she could see the stars stretching out forever. Somewhere ahead, the Thornaki High Command waited. She had requested this assignment. The Valari Consortium had not wanted to send anyone on such a dangerous mission. The Thornaki had never agreed to meet with any species before. This could be a trap. This could be a slaughter, but Kiraveth needed to understand. She needed to see what the humans would do next. She needed to know how this story would end. The Horizon was not a warship. It was a diplomatic vessel, built for comfort and communication, not for combat. It had shields and weapons, yes, but nothing compared to the warships that traveled alongside it. 20 human vessels formed a protective ring around the Horizon, their weapons ready for anything. But Daniel Cole had insisted on taking the diplomatic ship. He said it would send a message. He said the Thornaki needed to see that humanity came in peace. Kiraveth thought he was either the bravest being she had ever met or the most foolish. During the journey, she spent much of her time watching the humans. She ate with them in their dining hall. She walked through their corridors and visited their workspaces. She listened to their conversations and observed their habits. They were strange beings. They laughed constantly. They made jokes about everything, even danger, even death. They touched each other all the time, clasping hands and patting shoulders and embracing. They argued loudly about small things and then acted like the arguments had never happened. One evening, she found Daniel Cole alone in the observation lounge. He was sitting in a chair near the window, a cup of coffee in his hand, staring out at the stars. She asked if she could join him. He smiled and gestured to the chair beside him. For a long time, they sat in silence. Kiraveth watched the stars and thought about everything she had seen. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the assembly. Why did humanity offer mercy to those who showed none? What advantage did forgiveness serve? Daniel was quiet for a moment. He took a sip of his coffee and set the cup down on the small table beside him. He told her about his grandmother. She had been a child during one of the great wars on Earth, he said. Her name was Helen. She had lived in a small town in a place called Poland. When the war came, soldiers had taken everyone she loved. Her parents, her brothers, her grandparents, all gone. She had survived only because a neighbor had hidden her in a basement for 2 years. When the war ended, Helen was alone. She was 8 years old, and everyone she had known was dead. Kiraveth felt her heart's ache at the story. She could not imagine such suffering. Her own childhood had been peaceful and safe, surrounded by family and friends. Daniel continued. He said that Helen had every reason to spend her life hating. The people who had killed her family were still alive. Some of them lived in her own country. She could have dedicated her existence to revenge, to making them pay for what they had done. Instead, she had become a healer. She had gone to school and learned medicine. She had spent her life helping others, treating the sick and the wounded. She had even treated the children and grandchildren of the people who had destroyed her family. When Daniel was a little boy, he had asked her why. He could not understand how she could help people connected to such evil. He had asked her how she could forgive. Helen had smiled at him and taken his small hands in her old ones. Hatred is easy, she had told him. Anyone can hate. Hatred requires no strength, no courage, no growth. You just have to close your heart and let the darkness in. But forgiveness, she had said. Forgiveness is hard. Forgiveness requires you to be stronger than the pain. It requires you to choose a different path, even when revenge would feel so much better. Forgiveness is the only power that can break the cycle. And she had told him something else, something that Daniel had never forgotten. The people who hurt me are long dead, she had said. If I spend my life hating them, I am only hurting myself. They win, even from the grave. But if I choose to love, if I choose to heal, if I choose to build instead of destroy, then I take that power away from them. I become free. Daniel looked at Kiraveth. His eyes were wet, she noticed. His grandmother had died when he was 15 years old. But her words had shaped everything he became. When he joined the human military, He had remembered her lessons. When he was given command of the diplomatic fleet, he had tried to live by her example. Humanity had done terrible things, Daniel said. They had killed and destroyed and caused suffering beyond measure. But they had also learned from their mistakes. They had built something new from the ashes of their failures. Forgiveness was not weakness, he said. Forgiveness was the hardest thing a person could do. It required more strength than any weapon, more courage than any battle, and it was the only path to real peace. Kiraveth sat in silence, absorbing his words. She thought about the Thonaki waiting ahead, the monsters who had consumed 17 species. She thought about the anger and hatred that filled the galaxy, the demands for revenge and extinction, and she thought about an 8-year-old girl hiding in a basement, alone in the darkness, choosing to become a healer. She asked Daniel one more question. Did he really believe the Thornaki could change? Did he really believe they could become something other than destroyers? Daniel finished his coffee and looked out at the stars. He said he did not know. He said he hoped so. He said humanity had changed, and if humans could change, maybe anyone could. But even if the Thornaki rejected the offer, he said, the offering still mattered. The attempt still mattered. Reaching out a hand, even to an enemy, was never wasted, because every act of mercy, every moment of kindness, every choice to love instead of hate, added something good to the universe. And in the end, that was the only victory that lasted. Kiraveth looked at the human beside her and saw something she had never expected. She saw hope. She looked at the human in fear. Later, the galaxy learned he wielded true power part 5. The meeting with the Thonaki High Command took place on a dead world between the stars. It had no sun, no warmth, no life. It was a place of darkness and cold, fitting for a meeting between ancient enemies. Kiraveth watched from the observation deck as the Thornaki fleet emerged from the void. There were thousands of them, black ships that moved like living things, their hulls pulsing with strange light. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The horizon moved forward alone, leaving the protective ring of warships behind. Daniel Cole had insisted on this. He said the Thonaki needed to see that humanity trusted them. Samantha Gray had called him crazy. He had laughed and agreed with her. The meeting room on the horizon had been prepared carefully. The air was cold, the way the Thornaki preferred. The lights were dim. In the center of the room, a large table waited with chairs for both species. Daniel Cole sat on one side. Kiraveth was allowed to sit behind him, an observer for the Volari Consortium. On the other side of the table, 3 Thornaki entered. They were even more terrifying up close. Their bodies were a mixture of metal and flesh, twisted together in ways that made Kiraveth's mind hurt. Their eyes glowed with cold blue light. When they moved, she could hear the grinding of gears and the whisper of organic tissue. The leader of the Thonaki was called the Prime. It was larger than the others, and its eyes burned brighter. When it spoke, its voice was like metal scraping against stone. The translators took a moment to process the words. Why should we trust you? The Prime asked. You are small. You are young. You are nothing compared to us. Daniel did not flinch. He looked directly at the Prime and answered. He said that the Thornaki were right. Humanity was young and small. They had been in space for only 40 years. Compared to the ancient civilizations of the galaxy, they were children. But children, he said, sometimes saw things that adults had forgotten. Children asked questions that no one else thought to ask. Children believed in things that older beings had given up on. Humanity believed that the Thornaki could change. The Prime made a sound that might have been laughter. We have consumed 17 species, it said. We have killed billions. We are the terror of the galaxy. And you believe we can change? Daniel nodded. He said that humanity had killed billions of their own kind. They had caused suffering beyond measure. They had nearly destroyed their own world with weapons and pollution and hatred. And they had changed. Not completely, he admitted. Not perfectly. Humans were still capable of violence and cruelty. They still made mistakes. They still hurt each other, but they had learned to do better. They had built systems to help them choose peace over war. They had created laws and traditions that encouraged mercy instead of revenge. They had spent generations teaching their children that destruction was not the only path. If humans could learn these things, the Thornaki could too. The Prime was silent for a long moment. Its blue eyes flickered. Processing. Then it asked the question that changed everything. Why do you offer us the cure? We are your enemies. We would have destroyed you. Why save us? Daniel stood up slowly. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of the Prime. He looked up at the massive alien, showing no fear. He told the Prime about Helen, his grandmother. He told the story of a little girl who lost everything and chose to become a healer. He spoke of the lessons she had taught him about hatred and forgiveness, about the power of mercy and the weakness of revenge. The Thornaki were dying, Daniel said. They were afraid. Fear had driven them to terrible things. But fear did not have to be the end of their story. Humanity was offering them a choice. They could take the cure, stop the destruction, and begin the long process of healing. They could stand before the tribunal and face the judgment of the species they had wronged. They could spend generations making amends, or they could refuse and continue down the path of destruction. If they chose destruction, Daniel said, humanity would stop them. The human fleet was small, but it was powerful enough. The Thornaki had seen what human weapons could do, but humanity did not want to fight. Humanity wanted to help, because adding more death to the universe solved nothing. Because revenge only created more pain. Because the only real victory was breaking the cycle of destruction and building something new. The Prime stared at Daniel for what felt like forever. The other Thornaki remained motionless, waiting. Then the Prime spoke again. Your grandmother, it said. She forgave those who destroyed her family? Daniel nodded. The Prime was silent for another long moment. Then it made a sound that the translators could not process. A strange vibration that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside its body. Finally, it spoke words that Kiraveth would remember for the rest of her life. We accept, the Prime said. We are tired of destruction. We are tired of fear. Show us this other path. 10 years later, Kiraveth stood before the Galactic Assembly. She was the first non-human ambassador to Earth, a position that had never existed before. Behind her, the delegates of 100 species waited in silence. She thought about that first day when she had watched Daniel Cole walk into the chamber and felt terror in her heart. She thought about the journey she had taken since then, the things she had seen, the lessons she had learned. The Thornaki Accords had held. The cure had worked. The tribunal had happened, and justice had been served. The Thornaki now protected endangered species across the galaxy, using their terrible power to defend instead of destroy. It had not been easy. There had been setbacks and failures. Some Thornaki had rejected the new path and had to be stopped. Some species in the assembly still called for extinction instead of reconciliation, but humanity had held firm. They had kept their promise. They had shown the galaxy what true power looked like. Kiraveth began her speech. She spoke of fear and hope. She spoke of mercy and strength. She spoke of the long journey from destruction to healing. And she told the galaxy about a little girl named Helen, who had hidden in a basement during the darkest time in human history, and had emerged to teach the universe that forgiveness was the greatest power of all. In the front row, Daniel Cole sat with his grandchildren. His hair was white now, and his face was lined with age. but his eyes were the same, calm and kind and full of quiet strength. He smiled as Kiriveth finished her speech. Around him, the galaxy applauded, and somewhere, in the space between the stars, a fleet of black ships that had once been the terror of the universe now patrolled the borders of the known galaxy, protecting the weak from those who would do them harm. The Thornaki had learned a new purpose, and humanity had taught them what true power really meant. It meant reaching out a hand, even to your worst enemy. It meant choosing mercy when revenge would be easier. It meant believing that anyone could change, and it meant never, ever giving up on the possibility of a better universe. That was the legacy of humanity. That was true power, and the galaxy would never forget it.